Tonight, I'm delighted that Patrick Adams is back at Boston College. It's a wonderful thing for Boston College that he does. And he will be introducing this evening a recovery, the making of HBO's Marathon, the Patriots Day bombing. He'll be introduced, as we've been doing with this series, by an undergraduate, Guy Guenther, who is a medical humanities minor. We wanted to underline that, and also a biology major. He's been involved in student government, a tour guide, with an a cappella group, but he's probably best known by everybody for his first opinion piece that he did in the Medical Humanities Journal called Steroids for Smarties. On that note, Guy.
I don't know about best known, but good evening, and thanks, Father Keenan, for the introduction. My name is Guy Guenther. I'm a senior in the Morrissey College of Arts and Sciences, studying biology and medical humanities, health, and culture. I'm planning to continue on to medical school after a gap year following graduation in the spring. I'm honored to be here tonight to introduce our speaker and his inspiring story. Every member of the greater Boston community has a personal story or connection with the event that occurred on April 15, 2013. I'd like to begin briefly with mine. In the spring of 2013, I planned to visit Boston College to confirm my decision to accept admission for the following fall. I booked my flight for April 18th, months in advance. Little could I, or anyone else, begin to imagine that 3 days before my arrival in Boston, the city would be shaken to its core by the Marathon bombing. I arrived the night that Officer Collier was killed in the line of duty at MIT, and about 24 hours before the second bomber was apprehended in nearby Watertown. The ordinary college visit I had prepared for ended up being one of the most memorable experiences of my life. First, I met the Boston College community on lockdown. I spent all of Friday in a locked dorm on Lower Campus, where I actually learned more about BC and the quality of students we have here than I could have in any classroom. I also met the city of Boston, a city full of fear, sadness, and anger, but also full of courage, determination, compassion, and most importantly, love. The latter are the values that Patrick and his wife Jessica Kensky have exemplified since their lives were so dramatically changed in the spring of 2013. Patrick graduated from the Lynch School of Education at Boston College in 2005 with degrees in philosophy and human development. Patrick ran the Boston Marathon as a senior to raise funds for Boston College's campus school, which serves special needs children. He and Jessica met in Washington, D.C. in 2006. 7 years later, they were married and living in Boston. Jessica was an oncology nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital, and Patrick was working on his psychology doctoral dissertation at William James College in Newton. They both decided to take Patriots Day off from work to watch the Boston Marathon from a spot close to the finish line. Tragically, Patrick and Jessica were both severely injured during the bombing that day and have had to overcome incredible challenges in the years since. On April 16, 2016, Patrick passed the Boston Marathon starting line at 9 a.m. He completed the 120th running of the race in a little under 6 hours and finished at 2:46 p.m., 3 minutes before the time the first bomb went off in 2013. He was the first Boston bombing amputee to complete the entire marathon on foot. However, he was running the marathon for more than just himself. Supported by friends from the class of 2005, Patrick and Jessica started the Boston College Strong Scholarship with the intention of raising funds to support a student with a physical disability. This last fall, Patrick, Jessica, and his fellow classmates announced that they had raised over $250,000 to endow the scholarship. Patrick and Jessica also participated in the HBO documentary Marathon, which we'll view tonight. The Boston Globe wrote the following about Patrick training for the marathon in 2016. As the miles pass, he thinks of everything he loved about the sense of community and the spirit of service at Boston College, and imagines the first scholarship recipient arriving at the heights to a warm welcome. When students arrive at Boston College, we are taught two tenets central to our school's mission: men and women for others, and ever to excel. We are asked to consider others before we consider ourselves. We are asked to forge ahead in the face of adversity. Patrick, with graduation looming, I've spent a lot of time thinking about my trajectory as a Boston College alumnus. Through learning your story, I have come to believe that you are truly the embodiment of those tenets and everything that they stand for. To face the tragedy that has befallen you and your wife alone is an amazing feat. But to simultaneously focus on giving back to others is what's awe-inspiring. You're someone every Boston College student can learn from, and an excellent example of what we should all strive to be. I speak for all students here on the Heights when I say we are honored and thankful to be a part of the same Boston College family. Please join me in welcoming back to Boston College, Patrick Downs.
Thank you very much. I figured this might be somewhat emotional, but it wasn't until guys started talking that I realized that it was really going to be emotional. I have idolized Boston College since I was a little guy. When Doug Flutie was around, and I had a little tutu jersey, and I would run around the house with the football, jumping on the couch, pretending I was him, and always aspired to be a BC student. And so not only has it been an honor to be a BC graduate, but to come back and to speak with all of you. The marathon, as Guy was saying, affected so many people in Boston. Not just those who had physical injuries or whose loved ones were killed, but the city, the state, the country, and even the world responded initially with fear and terror, and then with unbelievable signs of community and love and hope. And this documentary that we're going to see tonight tries to capture all of that there are many different ups and downs and undulations that go with this experience. Some of it is incredibly sad, painfully so, and stretches on for a time period that can't even be measured. And other parts of it are kind of whimsical and funny. I suppose I wouldn't be talking to you all here tonight if I didn't get my light blown off. So, I have that going for me. And we have to use that sort of gallows humor among our EPT group, among our friends at Walter Reed, because shit, life happened to us, we got blown up, but that doesn't mean that we have to stop, that doesn't mean we have to all of a sudden be serious all the time or funny all the time, that we can go back and forth. My wife and I have tried to do that. We've had to do that in order for the time to elapse. She's still a patient at Walter Reed. She had surgery 6 weeks ago. And we've been living there now for 2.5 years as she's undergone this recovery that we thought might last a couple months. And so all of these themes and emotions, hopefully you'll pick up on tonight. And so it's okay to be sad when it's sad, because it will be sad. It's okay to laugh when it's funny, because there are parts that are kind of funny. And I look forward to talking to you at the end and picking up on what you saw in the film and what your takeaways are, because I found that it's been so different for every group that we've shown it to. But thank you all for coming, and I'll see you after the film.
Allow people to ask Patrick questions, anything. And I don't know whether I want to leave you like 5 minutes of deep breathing and composure, but yes.
I have a question. How was your wife doing, Patrick?
Thank you. She's doing, well, not great. She had surgery 6 weeks ago, and we've had surgery after surgery, because they keep, when you look at her initially, you see 2 legs missing below the knee. And in the amputee world, it's not great, but it's not the worst. As you saw, some of our buddies at Walter Reed are missing 3-4 limbs and have all kinds of injuries to internal organs in their brains. And so you look at her and you think that she's going to recover fairly quickly. If you're a single below-knee amputee like I am, at Walter Reed you're called a paper cut. Because they're like, what the fuck's the big deal, buddy? Just like, start walking in. But if you're missing 2, then you have a little bit more credibility. But her issue has been getting tissue coverage over her bone. And as you saw from some of the pictures, the burns are so bad to tissue, because blast injuries are so unlike other amputations from vascular disease or otherwise, because all that tissue around the bone gets compromised, and so you can't, it's hard to give someone a really good residual limb to then weight bear through. And she keeps having issues with that, gets these sacs called bursa filled with fluid, and they can get infected and they have to be removed. On a couple of occasions, she had surgery and a few weeks later fell on the end of her leg. And even though we know they're not there anymore, our brains still think that they might be, and we try to put our foot down and we go crash into the ground. Sometimes it's just kind of funny, and then other times it can be catastrophic in her case. And then the psychological piece of it is just, we don't even know what to say anymore. It's awful. It's just a persistent purgatory where you just, because, if she had to use a wheelchair all the time and we knew that that was the end game, then that's the plan. We get a wheelchair accessible car, we, change the way we live our lives and make that work. And we have a number of those adaptations now, but we would do them differently. But there's a chance she could walk again. And so she's trying to envision what her life's going to be like. Can she be a mother? Could she chase little kids around? Could she go back to being a nurse and being on her feet for 12, 14 hours a day? Let alone run again. That's not even all that important anymore. So it's been an incredibly long process for her and for us as a couple. But Walter Reed and our group from Boston, they helped to normalize it for us and carry us through, as well as our amazing families. Who else has a question? I flew all the way up here for questions. I've seen the documentary a number of times. Yes, please. We felt like it was important for us to share our story, and many times Jess and I went back and forth as to whether or not we wanted to do this, because obviously it's very personal, and we could watch this and we could be divorced and hate each other, or things could really turn. Jess always says, I didn't want the documentary to end like this, with me kind of in this weird spot. I wanted to be finishing the marathon with Patrick, and not that I planned for that to happen anyway, but we felt like it was important that not only does the public see what happens in the immediate aftermath of hate and terror, but what that long recovery is like. And so then we wanted the same thing when something goes down in Orlando or San Bernardino or Brussels or Paris. I mean, this stuff it's happened many times before Boston and many times since. And so you have to think about, okay, do we do something to prevent this? Or can we ever prevent it? And depending on how we answer that question, well, how are we going to respond to it? And how are we going to make sure that people are taken care of in the amazing way that we've been taken care of and the resources we've had? So we felt like it was important to be as honest as possible. Come on, undergraduates. Oh, yeah.
So how much red tape did it take for you to be able to get the help that you're getting now?
So we had all these politicians who came into our hospital rooms and said, what can we do? Tell us what to do, blah, blah. And we didn't know what they could do. But when we got a year and a half out and Jess's leg was still hanging on, but she was in incredible pain, we had gone around the country, I said, well, all these people offered to help. So I just called their offices and said, well, we need help now. We know exactly what we need from you. And they didn't even know how to do it, because the Secretarial Designee Program, which is what the Secretary of Defense has the power to admit civilians into military medicine. It happens, but it's like, some prince in Saudi Arabia breaks his ankle and we happen to have the expertise here in America. But the other instance in which some of the older people in the room might remember is ABC News reporter Bob Woodruff was injured in Iraq, and so he used the secretarial designee process. But Senator Warren, we've been trying to tell our story to think about how we respond to these things better. Senator Warren at the end of last year, introduced a bill to expand that program to allow much easier access for survivors of terrorism to access military medicine. And really, it's a twofold benefit. We get the benefit because we get the best care in the world. And in these times when the military is in this relative peace, we're not fully at peace, or in a relative peace, they still need trauma patients. They need people missing limbs. They need people in our situations because those doctors have to maintain their expertise for the next time we're in some type of military conflict. And so this is really I never thought that my world would overlap in such an intimate way with the military, and yet it has. We're also working on a national trauma care system with Senator Duckworth from Illinois, who's a double amputee combat injured Army helicopter pilot. And that would be to really improve the collaboration between civilian and military medicine. Because there's no reason these things should exist in two different silos. If an American is hurt, we need to use the best resources to care for them. Yes?
What sort of things are going through your mind as you were running the marathon a year later?
So the training itself is very emotional. I did it with my brother, his BC grad, and Jess's sister. And even the idea of running a marathon was hard for Jess and me because part of her didn't want me to do it because it meant that it was such a clear example of how far apart we were. And yet at the same time, she wanted me to optimize my potential. And all that training is just exhausting for anyone who's done the marathon before. And the nutrition and the sneakers and the stretching, and I did like everything under the book to make sure my body stayed together. So then when the morning came, I said, well shit, I made it this far, I can make it to the finish line. And you have all these mile markers in your head, and I had an amazing team with me. But there was a part, like at mile 10, where I really hit a wall. I dehydrated, which I usually never do, but I was like too excited, I wasn't even thinking about drinking water. And so I really had to shut down and just run and not really think too much until I hit BC. And then I saw, you can see the towers as you're coming up the hills, and it's already a reward because the hills are so hard. But to see all these students along the route, and a bunch of you had roses. I'm not really sure why, but someone would give me a rose, and then I'd give it back to somebody else, and someone would give me a rose, and I'd give it back to someone else. And it was just incredibly special for me. And I usually would run a mile and walk a minute, but when I hit BC, I just walked the whole way because I wanted to soak it up. And then you're home. You got Boston. The noise is slowly increasing. They're welcoming you down to Boylston Street. And then Boylston Street itself is incredibly emotional, knowing that that was where 3 lives were taken and many lives were forever changed. And yet, this opportunity to reauthor that moment and have it mean something else than just sadness. So it was incredibly emotional. Yes?
What was it like being portraying Patriots Day? Were you happy with making them?
So it was really interesting to do both a documentary and a Hollywood film almost at the same time. This documentary was hundreds of hours of work, emails, phone calls, getting Walter Reed to let us in the door to film, interviews, yada, 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 and no money. And then the Patriots Day film, they just cut you a check and they meet with you for a couple hours and then you're good to go. So it's like very strange. And so clearly like this is a much more in-depth, nuanced story of what happened. And it had a different aim. And Patriots Day itself covered 5 days from the bombing until Poppy said that this is our fucking city, which makes me smile every damn time. And, but I think it fell short in some ways. And then in other ways, I'm wondering, can you ever capture what happened in this city in an hour and a half? And anyone who was here during that time knows that it's just not possible. And that as Jess always says, you have to take all of the things that have been produced as a whole. The books that have been written, the news articles, TV stories, because there are all these stories. I mean, I didn't know that Guy had, just landed here during the lockdown. He had his own incredibly profound experience, and I'm sure he's reminded of that all the time. He goes to school now, and yet that was his, first impression. And so, I do know that anytime, if everyone asks me to be in a film again, I want to be a producer. Because I want to have some ability to say, yes, that's in, no, that's not, or we need to focus on something else more. Because at some point you just turn your lives over to them and they run with it. So Jess and I tried to make the best out of the Patriots Day movie. It's interesting. People in Boston thought it was good, not great, because they didn't get everything. People in the rest of the part of the country thought it was amazing. Because we all saw every second of it unfold and knew what was missing or should have been included. And the rest of the country used it as an example of another terrorist attack in America and how we can learn from it. So I've been trying to look at it from different perspectives, but so far not too many regrets about it. Yes?
As somebody who grew up in Massachusetts and went to Boston College at SAI,
Yeah.
One thing you mentioned that they can't do well in film is just what the extent of the game.
Yeah.
The city at its best, it really is, it's BC at its best.
Right.
On days of the year.
Yeah.
What's your perspective now? Do you think of it, I'm sure it's hard to think of it as one versus the other, but can you kind of just describe what it is for you now?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think it's the best party day of the year, and because it's a parade, we've all been in hibernation, we finally get out into some decent weather, and I have these distinct memories of just going down to the mods and eating cheap hamburgers and burgers and drinking cheap beer, and then just going out onto the Comm Ave and watching these humans run this race with their hearts on their sleeve. I mean, you see the Kenyans go, and then, boom, they're gone. And then you go back to drinking, and then you come back out, and they're like these real human beings running 26.2 miles. Some of these people don't even look like they can walk down the street and survive, let alone run the thing. And you got all these people cheering them on and calling out their name and handing them water and roses. I mean, it's like such a cool representation of community. And then, of course, there's this incredible black mark on it. And Jess is still struggling with this. She still sees it. For her, it's still a really hard day because I think the trauma isn't fully closed yet. Like people talk about post-traumatic stress, but you have to be post the trauma for it to really count. She still feels like she's in it. For me, it's a really special day to come back with some of our buddies from Walter Reed and celebrate them as patriots on Patriots Day and hand cycle with them and all the ways that they have made contributions to our country and friendships and for Jess and me. They welcomed us to Walter Reed and we get to welcome them back to Boston. We certainly always think of Martin, Sean, Crystal, Lindsay, I mean all the time, but particularly on the 15th and particularly that day, because we know that their families' hearts are aching. But you also look at those families and what they've chosen to do with that day, and many of them have teams that go out and run the race. And it's like this very profound statement of this is still us, like this is still Boston. We're always going to think of it differently, but it's still an incredibly special day, and we're going to use it to raise money to build parks in Dorchester and make sure that firefighters have adequate equipment and all these wonderful goals. But I think it will always be a mixed bag, as it will be for everybody in the city. And I think everyone who comes from Europe to run that race, they still know that it's a nuanced day. Yes?
Is there an aspect of your BC education that you feel like has resonated for these couple of years?
That's a great question, because it feels like all of it has in some way. At BC, I went to BC High and BC, so that means I'm a double eagle. So I have two sets of wings back here, if you can see them. at both institutions, it's all about character and community. And we call it different things, Manual Forever is Ever to Excel, but it's about how do you develop your character to be a really meaningful part of a community and make sure that you surround yourself with really meaningful characters. And that has just been the story of these last couple of years. That, there's been the rehabilitation, but then there's just been this community aspect of it. And what kind of character you're going to go through this experience with. And that doesn't, it's not always beautiful, I'm not always positive. But being in places like BC teach you how to think in all of those shades of gray that you need to when you're faced with something this complicated. Emotionally, intellectually, finding good conversation partners to talk it out with, to make some sense out of it, because you can't make sense of it on your own. And all of the contacts that people made in the days after the bombing and continue to make, just to say, hey, we're thinking about you, we're praying for you. I've always felt that my parents, BC High and BC, were the most influential groups on me, and it still feels that way. And I think even more so after all this. And so I can't really pinpoint what FBC did it for me, but it was that collective experience of continuing to be challenged by people like Steve Pope, like Dave Manzo, like Father Jim, that, they are here not just to get a paycheck and to teach you something, but to build you as people, because we don't know what we're going to confront in life. And hopefully it's never anything this horrific, but cancer happens a lot, illness happens a lot, you lose your job, any number of things happen to people all the time that they have to overcome. And so then they have to rely on their character and their community to find some way out of it. Yes?
I know in the film they spoke about a bit how you didn't hope for the death penalty in the trial. Can you speak to a little bit how it felt when you and your wife heard the verdict and just that aftermath of that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was a really hard thing for us. I'd always been against the death penalty, in Father Paris's law medicine ethics class, we debate that kind of stuff all the time, and just, for many reasons I was against death penalty. And then you have a personal experience of it, and it's just totally different. And to be honest with you, I wasn't all that concerned with the bombing. That he wasn't I wasn't really concerned about mercy or death or innocence or any of that kind of stuff. It was very clear that he had done it. And I thought, and we thought, and others thought, that the best way for us to heal and for the city to heal was for him to go away in prison for the rest of his life. And for him to not be on our news coverage or his name be... We need to learn something from these people who do this stuff, because that's the only way we can compile some data and maybe figure out how to stop something. But we never use his name because we just don't think that they deserve that kind of attention. We do think that we should more frequently say the names of the 4 amazing people who were killed. And our media has a weird way of doing that too. We know the name Timothy McVeigh from Oklahoma City bombs. I can't name anyone who was injured or killed, or whose a foundation was created in their name. How screwed up is that? It's really messed up. And so we felt like the best way to allow people to have some closure and heal was for him to have a life sentence and go away and not be in contact with anybody anymore. And, as some of the parents said, I don't want my little kids going to the prom and seeing this guy on the front page of the Globe. That's just re-traumatizing for people. And of course, our judicial system has these checks for good reason. We've screwed up many times before where we put people to death who are innocent. But in this case, it seemed pretty clear. And so, our position, I would love to say it was a very high moral position, very lofty, but in fact it was was almost kind of practical. It's like, let's spend more time talking about the stories of resilience than about violence. And so that's how we concluded with that. But we waited until some of the other families said something first, because legally the death penalty was there because he killed people, not because he took my leg or my wife's legs. And so they were the ones who had to say something first.
I'm just curious too, kind of going along with that, you know, obviously the documentary shows your wife testifying. What was it like to, I mean, I assume you were there too, to be in, you know, not only talk about confronting it, but to be in the same room with the person who had, you know, done this to you. Just talk a little bit about what it was like to not only know who it was, but to be in there.
Yeah, I mean, he was the same distance as you and I from each other when Jess was on the stand. She was that close to him. I couldn't really see his face, but could see the back of his head and his profile a little bit. We had stayed away from the courthouse until that day. Well, the night before, they kind of prep you for the testimony. Jess really felt like it was important to do it. It was therapeutic for her to go in there and recount it somehow. But I was incredibly nervous, because who knows how your loved one is going to react when you're sitting in that room and you have all kinds of eyes on you, from legal teams to media. But when she drew the heart over my face, the whole courtroom started laughing, including me. And then I just took a deep breath, and I knew she was good. She's an incredibly powerful woman, and clearly very sassy too. And I could tell she was herself. But it was a zoo. I don't know, some of those families went every day. I don't know how they did that, because it was stressful, it was exhausting. You have to go in a back door so media's not taking a picture of you, and it felt like a lot of work, and we didn't get much out of it. And we were grateful that it was only one day. Jim?
So, something different, just about your time being here. But in the beginning of the academic year, we have a session out here. Could you care to comment on that session?
The one with fire?
Yeah, the one that was already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as a student, thanks for bringing that up. It's like a shameless plug. I didn't even plan that in the audience. Late at night, when my girlfriend had broken up with me, or I was stressed about a test, or I needed to get away from my roommates, I would walk down Linden Lane. It was always incredibly quiet and beautiful. And no, Catholicism says, like, don't, pray to idols, all that kind of stuff, but the Eagle's just too cool to not, like, feel a little moved by. And Gaston, and you have all these other universities around the country that have these really cool ceremonies, and it's a great way to welcome students and promote community. And as an orientation leader, we would talk about that stuff in the 3 days that you come in the summer, but then, did students really feel that when they got on campus? So my best friend and I, Mike Kunjan, came up with this idea to have this great procession, and you could name each of the dorms as they came down, and you could light a torch and wave fire around, and have the bells and gassing going off, and have the fight song being played by the band when you got down to Conti. And they were like, no, that's a terrible idea. And so we laid it to rest. And then like 2 weeks before, they told us, all right, we're gonna do it. And so my buddy and I stayed up like all night putting it together. It's the coolest thing. It's like, I come back secretly sometimes, just standing on the sidewalk just to watch it, because it's just so fun to see that it's endured. And the first year, we were so excited to play with fire that we forgot to put the fire out. So there was a huge cauldron of fire right in front of the Eagle, and we had walkie-talkies. We were down at Conti, and the new fire department was being called to go put it out. Like these dumb BC kids leaving things lit. But it's this really cool way, I think, of celebrating community, both as you arrive here as a student and as you depart as a graduate, and certainly in the fall with convocation too. Yes? Absolutely not. it's a really stupid idea. Even if you have a fully able body, it's dumb. Your knees hurt, your feet hurt, your hips hurt, your back hurts, your head hurts, you're dehydrated, skin's all not good, afterward. And so, but I knew I needed to prove to myself that I could do it, so I did it. But I am gonna hand cycle it. And Jess and I hand cycled it the year after the bombing. I hand cycled it with my buddies from Walter Reed 2 years after, and then ran last year. And the hand cycle thing is really cool. And the Boston Athletic Association that operates the marathon are terrible to people with disabilities. It drives me crazy. They love keeping the field size low. They're a bunch of old white dudes who've never had an injury in their lives. They just think running is the only way to be athletic. And most of the participants are patriots. They're military, combat injured, service members. They're patriots, and it's called Patriots Day, and then they tell them that they can't do it. So it drives me crazy. We've been able to bump the number up a little bit. I had to scream at the executive director last year because he was playing these games and stuff, and Jess had just needed to have another surgery, so I just called him and yelled at him, and so he bumped the numbers up a little bit. But it's still a problem. But I think it's a really cool way to still be athletic without feeling terrible at the end, and also highlighting people with disabilities and how they can still be athletic. Maybe not in conventional ways, but we are still incredibly athletic, strong people. But I'll watch all of you run instead.
One last question.
Yes. Go ahead. Yeah.
I would feel terrible. I was wondering how people are doing financially, with the cost of the aesthetics. Because at the beginning, there's such an outpouring. And I'd love to know what's going on.
It's a great question. It's something that we've had to be incredibly conscious and thoughtful about now. And we think about every time there's another terrorist attack that there was $80 million raised in the one fund, which is unprecedented. All private. None of that was government money. 9/11, there was a huge pot of money, all from the government. But then, after Sandy Hook, there was $6 or $7 million. I don't even know what the totals were after Orlando or San Bernardino, but not 80 million. So how do those people pay for their health care? And a single below knee prosthetic can be 30 to 50. If you're an above knee, it's easily north of $100,000. And that's good for a couple of years. You gotta change that out. And insurance does not cover running legs. So the running leg I ran the marathon in is considered a luxury item by health insurance. So that had to be gifted to me in order for me to be able to do it. And then Jess and I had to say, okay, we have this money, and there's a lot of it, but we don't know what the future holds. We don't know what our employment status is going to be. We don't know what kind of surgeries are on the horizon. So we got to save this. Some of our other friends have had a lot of other commitments with kids or other family who need money, and we hope that they're being mindful about it. We talk to them about it because we all have to be financially savvy now. And then in the military, they get legs for life. When you go to the VA, as long as the VA is doing what it's supposed to do, you get prosthetics. And so, that cost is taken care of. But an ordinary, everyday citizen who is in a car accident, loses a leg, their insurance is going to cover some of it, but then, not much else. Because insurance companies don't think it's really worth it to have people run and be healthy and therefore avoid all these other health problems far down the road. So it seems a little backwards, but what else is there? So, thankfully Jess and I have been very good about Mass General. The employees at Mass General, where my wife worked, donated over 3.5 years of paid time off. Janitors, nurses, doctors, physician's assistants, anybody, just kept writing down all these days. So she's been getting a full salary since the bombing, and even more importantly, full health insurance. And we were accepted to Walter Reed based on the condition that we had health insurance. So all that's being billed to our health insurance. So without that, not only do we not get good care, we don't get to Walter Reed. And so, what do other people do? I don't know. And so that's why we're trying to do some things to improve that.
I want to just make one comment. I started teaching here in 2003, and in this, that was actually right in the middle of the sex abuse scandal, really being in full vigor in Boston, and Boston College being deeply involved in a responsive way. And it was the spring, right, of 2005, when you were senior year, or was maybe fall of 2004. There was an enormous event. Conti Forum was filled for a set of interviews of 5 or 6 panelists, with Tim Russert chairing the session. And the undergraduate student was Patrick Downs. And I remember listening to you then and thinking about that this evening. Your eloquence, your resilience, your modesty, your specification, your ability to talk about others and to remember their stories rather than your own. And I think that that's what we heard here tonight too. The eloquence that you have, the specificity